It's Friday, and we're revisiting stories that you had a lot to say about over the last week. Back on Wednesday, we told you about the story of the Bear River Massacre. And we talked to Darren Perry, who is a descendant of a Shoshone tribal leader. And we talked to him about the history, or the lack of history, from that deadly attack. The history and truth buried and forgotten. The Shoshone back then spread their people across Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho. When the seasons changed, their people would settle in the Cache Valley, where deer and elk were plenty and a river ran through full of fish. And that river was the Bear River. And 159 years ago this weekend, hundreds of Shoshone were killed by the U.S. Army. Because history is written by the victors, as an old adage says, you wouldn't be blamed for not knowing much about the Bear River Massacre. Brian Holmes tells you the story.
It was 1862. The Civil War was working its way to a crescendo, its biggest battles still ahead. Out west and out of the action, California's 3rd Regiment Volunteer Infantry was sent eastward to Utah, not to fight for the Union, but to protect overland mail routes in the territory. And for one other reason, the federal government was worried the LDS Church would lead a secession from the Union.
So they were sent to babysit the Mormons. And look, they hated each other.
However, while establishing Fort Douglas outside Salt Lake City, the soldiers and saints found a common cause.
To combat the Native American problem.
That problem was centered in the Cache Valley, an area north in what is now Franklin County, Idaho, that piqued the interest of the pioneers for its plush resources.
The Saints came to the Cache Valley in 1855. 8 years later, there's thousands of them.
Outnumbered only by the head of cattle they brought with them to graze, they put up fences and hunted the same game as the Shoshone.
That depletion of resources really put an end to our people's way of life. It was the only way we knew how to live. But you take away a people's life, the only way they know how to live, and now what do? I tell people we had 3 options: beg for food, starve, or steal. And I'm sure they did all 3.
Thus, the Native American problem. The solution: send in the 3rd Regiment. On January 24th, 275 members marched north under the command of Colonel Patrick Connor.
When Connor left Salt Lake City, he had arrest warrants in his hand for the chiefs, Pocatello, Sagwitch, and Bear Hunter. He said, "I'm not going up there to arrest anyone. I'm not going to deprive my men a little fun of Indian killing."
Colonel Connor said as much in his report to U.S. Army Command nearly 2 weeks later, saying, despite the stated purpose of his orders, Connor informed the marshal that it was not my intention to take any prisoners, but that he could accompany me.
So he knew exactly in his mind what he was going to do, and he actually did it.
The regiment found the Shoshone hunkered down in their winter camp along the Bear River. At daylight, on January 29th, 1863, they attacked the 75 Lodge village. The Shoshone that could ran toward the icy river. The massacre lasted about 4 hours. 14 Army soldiers were killed. The Shoshone deaths numbered in the hundreds.
3 Mormon men at the direction of Brigham Young went in the next day to look for survivors and count the dead. And they both had counts over, all of them had counts of over 450, which they wrote down in their journals and then a report back to Brigham Young. And they said 2/3 of that number were women and children.
Only 150 Shoshone survived that morning, including Darren Perry's great-great-grandfather.
So I am a direct descendant of Sagwitch. He had a son named Yeager who survived the massacre as a 12-year-old by playing dead. My grandmother sat at his feet on many occasions and heard the story over and over. My grandmother's name was May Timbimbu Perry.
The Bear River Massacre remains the deadliest attack on Native Americans in U.S. history, and not really well known. Why do you think it's taken so long to kind of get this attention, or that it isn't as well known as you probably would like it to be?
I think early on that historians have said that, well, it was during the Civil War and just the news. There wasn't any news outlets out here other than the Deseret News, which they're not going to report on what happened. And I mean, it was kind of a black eye for the locals here. I had an old woman here in Cache Valley one day tell me that when I was a little girl, my great-grandfather told me never to talk about it. And so, I think the local saints felt a little guilt by having the Army come take care of the Indian problem. realizing now what that really meant. They weren't proud of it, and they have some responsibility in it. And so you just never really talk about it.
I guess that's probably why your grandmother and yourself feel it is important to tell this story.
You know, it is important, especially in today's world we live in. Look, we're all going to go through hard things. We're all going to go through things that are hard to discuss and talk about. That one terrible event shouldn't define us. And I want people to know, you know, you can talk about something hard, but then let's talk about what we can do together to make this world a better place.
Okay, so some of the comments we received about the Shoshone story were ones we expected, like this one from Faye. Faye wrote, "Thank you for the story about Bear River. So much history we are not told or taught, and you can understand why. It can be very ugly, but it is our history, and it's about time we faced it in order to go forward." But it also brought up critical race theory. Carrie, a retired teacher, texted in and said, "Darren Perry spoke eloquently about the importance of understanding history. Exactly what makes me concerned when people talk against critical race theory. Will our history continue to be buried?" And we actually got quite a few texts asking about critical race theory. Would teaching about an event like this even be something educators would be allowed to share under House Bill 377, which passed the Idaho State House last year? Now, that bill bans schools from teaching that one identity or group is superior over another. Unfortunately, though, this is not a question that we can answer, and that's because it has to be answered at every local level, because the local school boards, teachers and parents there, they dictate the curriculum, not the state or lawmakers. But it's important to know our history, to understand what happened, and to learn from it so that we can never make the same mistakes again.